China and the Gulf is still limited. China just export 1% of their, or the Gulf region import 1%, but they're still taking about 80% of their arms from the United States. And even the military presence, China have a small logistic base in Djibouti, maybe 200-300 people, but the United States, they have 25 bases among Gulf states and in the Middle East region with over 40,000 soldiers, and so they're dominant in this, and I think the United States will impact the Gulf region directly by political pressure. You know, you don't have to deal military with China, and if you deal in technology, we will put sanction in your companies, and they already done it with NVIDIA chips. You know, they said if you deal with China, we will stop and restrict your access to our chips, and also in oil, because there is talk they will price the oil in yuan, and that's for America. They don't want that if, which is big if, you know, that was negotiation to sign agreement with the Saudi Arabia defense agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia. If that's go ahead, and maybe not in the near future, because what's happening in Gaza and normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel become more difficult in this situation. But you never say no. Maybe next year, 2 years, 3 years after, if that happened, I don't think the Gulf, they can have it both ways. They will have a strong energy relation with China, but I think America will restrict them in technology and military. If the Gulf lose their confidence in America, and American, they said we are not commit anymore, I think they will continue what they're doing now. Diverse their relation with China, Russia, India, Turkey, and all over the world. That's the general impact in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So it's a division of labor and having it both ways in the Gulf region. Let's turn to Yahia to my left, and no, it's Yahia, it's your turn.
To me, all right, okay.
And it's about the wider, my question, because you're an expert on the wider Maghreb region, from Mauritania to Tunisia, Libya. What's the role and perception of China here in contrast to other parts of the MENA region?
First of all, by the way, I would like to thank the Forum for this kind invitation and the Friedrich-Ebert-Foundation for this kind invitation. There's a big difference. The first one is that the relationship has been much longer. I think you alluded to it earlier. The Chinese met with the Maghreb. Maghreb is the western part of the Arab world, where the sun sets, versus the Mashreq, where the sun rises. So they met in Bandung the first time before they were even independent. Egypt at the time was independent, but not the other Maghreb countries, and Egypt is not part of the Maghreb. So that's the major difference, is that the relationship was being built at that time, especially with Algeria, because Algeria was at war of national liberation against France, and the Chinese were the main supporters of that cause. And the Algerians had founded the provisional government of the Algerian Republic in 1958, and China was the first non-Arab country to recognize it. And then they established diplomatic relations with Algeria in December 1958, 4 years before Algeria's independence. It tells you, I'll come back a little bit to the relationship with Algeria, but for you to know that the support that China brought to Algeria is still anchored in the psyche of the old rulers of Algeria and so on and so forth, and the population, because China was there. More recently, the related ideology, communist ideology, or what have you, it was based on pragmatism. I do business with anybody, regardless of their ideology. So they started, dealing with even the more pro-Western countries, Morocco, Tunisia, these are more pro-Western, Libya was a difficult case, but it was a part of the policy as well. And so, but in the early 2000s, there was sort of takeoff of relations. And now I focus on Algeria more because the Algerians needed badly housing, construction, and so on and so forth. So it began with that. And the country needed it because the legitimacy of the powers in place needed to tell Bouteflika, who was badly elected at the time, said, look, I give you housing. And so all the companies began coming to Algeria, building, mushrooming, really, there was a lot of construction. And then it expanded to the rest of the Maghreb because the Maghreb was basically the countries themselves were diversifying their relations with all, they were non-aligned, but Algeria non-aligned, but with a lot of love for China, among others. So there was a sort of infrastructure diplomacy. China was bringing, many companies, you had automobile assemblies and so on and so forth, and big bridges in Morocco, in Tangier, big harbors and so on and so forth. And today what you see is even more involvement in or projects that are highly relevant to the Belt and Road Initiative, like the Maritime Silk Road, for instance, with the construction of ports all along the Mediterranean, because, well, also in the Atlantic Ocean, because Mauritania is on the Atlantic Ocean. So you can see these ports being built, and not only that, but the political relations. Political relations have improved with the pro-Chinese, if you wish, with the pro-Western countries. And so they're part of multilateral institutions like the FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum. So they're involved, and there's some sort of socialization with the Chinese and so on. So the opinion, you asked me, the last part of the question is about the perception of China. The perception of China is very positive. If you look at the Arab Barometer reports of 2020 and 21, you see an evolution, and the majority of actually all the countries in the Maghreb have a very positive opinion. They see roads being built, they see ports, they see buildings, so it's positive. And I know that what increased the positive perception was China's contribution to the fight against COVID in the region by providing medicine, sending medical teams and so on, and that was very much appreciated. There was a big I wrote an article called China's Health Diplomacy, and you can see the difference between what happened with the Europeans and the way the Europeans reacted compared to how the Maghreb states reacted, which was completely different. They were not critical. They didn't say, like my president Trump called it the Kung Fu virus and so on and so forth. No, on the contrary, they were very, initially, you would see the locals, the Maghreb states, poor and all that. When the virus started there in China, they sent medical equipment and so on and so forth, and then China reciprocated. And now they have, for instance, they have factories that produce the vaccines against COVID and so on and so forth. I know I spoke too much.
I was just about to intervene, so thank you for saving me that. And that brings me last but not least to Erato. And basically we can mirror what you described and turn it into a question on Cyprus. So there's a very positive perception in the Maghreb region on China. Is that also true for the current state of Chinese and Cypriot relations? How do Cypriots or the Republic of Cyprus perceive China as a player?
Thank you very much, Hubert. Cyprus and China established diplomatic relations 53 years ago. And all along, it has been a really, truly excellent relation between the two countries. It was a relationship which was based on true friendship, but also on political trust, respect, practical cooperation on a number of issues. But what I would say is the most important political bond between the two countries is their mutual support and very consistent support of the One China policy and the One Cyprus policy. I think this position permeates the entire spectrum of the relations between the two countries.
Είτε μας αρέσει και όχι, υπάρχει μια διεθνής αντίληψη, όχι τοπικά, αλλά διεθνώς. Και ξέρετε, πολλές φορές οι αντιλήψεις δημιουργούν και μια πραγματικότητα. Μπορεί εσύ να μην είσαι, αλλά το τι πιστεύει ο άλλος για σένα δημιουργεί και μια...
From that time on, because Cyprus was
Εγώ λέω ότι
a strong proponent of strong relations between the EU and China, and also Cyprus played and continues to play a constructive role, I would say sometimes as a bridge between the EU and China. I think this is also a very favorable part and element of the relationship between the two countries.
Ούτε μια χώρα πάλι.
In 2019, the two countries agreed that their relationship would be elevated to a partnership, a strategic partnership, and since then there are initiatives that go along that declaration. In 2021, the two countries signed a cooperation agreement on the Belt and Road initiative of China. That opens really new roads of cooperation for trade, for telecommunications. I should tell you that the Telecommunication Authority of Cyprus has used Chinese technology to upgrade its whole system. But also in other areas like high technology and tourism. Regarding the Cyprus issue, because that's another very important part of this cooperation, China, as a permanent member of the Security Council, has always played a very important role in support of all, I would say, all Security Council resolutions were supported by China, with the only exception, and this is not on the Cyprus problem, for a period of 10 years, 71 to 81, China maintained a very different position on peacekeeping operations. So it was either abstaining or non-participating in the vote of the renewal of the mandate of the Cyprus peacekeeping operation. But in all other resolutions adopted by the Security Council, China as a member, finally, the perception is very favorable, both at the citizen level. Citizens view China as a friendly country, primarily because of this one Cyprus, one China policy, but also because of its support on the Cyprus issue, sovereignty, territorial integrity of Cyprus, but also the business community, the academia. There are initiatives taking place in recent years with the opening of two Confucius institutes, exchanges, cultural exchanges, but also from the economic point of view. There is China is a big country with a big market, so all good.
All good, all rosy. High time to bring some shades of grey into the rosy picture and go back to Camille and ask about a player that might not be as positively predisposed. The European Union, a rather weak player in the region, I would start, but that's your assessment to be made. But what is the perception of the EU of China's role in the MENA region?
Well, so there is the perception of the EU and there is the perception of the member states. It's difficult to speak of a European perception of what China is doing in the MENA region, because there is, first of all, no coherent position on China and not very coherent position on MENA either. So when we talk to different European countries, they're going to have like quite different perspectives on both of these issues. So that doesn't help really having a clear vision. Here we see that we have a quite a very positive Cypriot view of China. For some other European countries, I'm from France, for example, we are quite going into the direct, opposite direction, where increasingly China is seen as, there is a triptych in the European position on China seen as a partner, as a competitor, economic competitor, and systemic rival. And in recent years, the systemic rival dimension has grown in importance in some of the European states' vision of China, with this idea that China is increasingly seen as a power that is openly contesting the current global governance systems, but also the Western values and Western-led international order, and that takes place everywhere, but also in the Middle East region. And for Europeans, that can be a concern to have a power that challenges openly, your interests and your vision of the world in a region that is in your direct neighborhood, that is very important for European security, energy security, and that is also an important maritime choke point, as we're seeing now in the crisis of the Red Sea. And so that raises a number of potential risk or concerns from a European perspective. So I mentioned a couple of them, but like overall, there is this concern that this may participate in eroding European influence, political influence, and ability to shape political developments in their direct neighborhood. The Europeans are already, they don't need China to erode their own ability to act in the Middle East, but this is, a broader trend that is participating in having European countries being less able to shape things there. There is the question that was raised at some point on what does that mean in terms of port access to critical infrastructures, access to also critical maritime choke points. If you have a player like China that is investing quite massively in port infrastructures in that region. For example, like just to give you an example from the French perspective, the fact that the Chinese have been investing a lot in the Khalifa port in the UAE. The UAE is an important country for the French because we have a military base there. And so if you have, and there has been some rumors of China leveraging a little bit that presence in Khalifa port to also have a military presence there. And so that, for example, creates a concern for French interest. Same thing for Djibouti. You have the energy security element that we see also resurging, especially in the context of the Ukraine war, where we see that the geopolitics of energy is not finished yet. There is also a question in the broader context of, tech competition between the US, China, the Europe in the middle, and that is also taking place partly in the Middle East. We see especially Gulf countries investing a lot in emerging technologies, AI. What does that mean if they work with the Chinese also on these critical technologies in terms of risk of tech transfers? Same for sensitive technologies like military technologies. To give another example from the French perspective, the UAE, for example, has been conducting with the Chinese a few months ago some military exercises in China using the French fighter jet Mirage. So here again, it creates another risk of transferring sensitive technologies when you have a multiplication of interaction in more sensitive sectors. And finally, there is this broader question, but it's very speculative, of what happens in case of an Indo-Pacific escalation over Taiwan or the broader Indo-Pacific region. We see already with the crisis in Ukraine that the Gulf states end up being indirectly involved in the way they react to, the energy and sanctions issues, the fact that they have helped, some of them have helped the Russians bypass some of the European sanctions. So what can we expect in the case of an escalation in the Indo-Pacific, where the Gulf states, for example, are major exporters of energy to that region and can end up being, playing an indirect role in that region? So there are lots of things that raise a lot of questions, and still at the moment it's difficult to know exactly how to react to that, especially given the fact that Middle Eastern countries, as we've heard, don't look at these issues the same way that the Europeans does. They're on the contrary, they see China as an opportunity. It gives them more leverage and more bargaining power when negotiating with the Europeans or with the US. So here there is a lot of negotiation work to do with them and to explore.
Thank you. That gives me the excellent opportunity to mirror that question and ask how Cyprus, which is a new member state, sees the role of China in the region. Do they share the concerns? What is their perception?
I would concentrate primarily on the Middle East, because this is an area of very, very close, this is an area of, is it working? Yes. It's an area of very close geographic proximity, as you can understand, only a few hundred kilometers from the shores of all these countries, Lebanon, Palestine, and the whole Middle East area. So Cyprus, although of course for over the years it has maintained excellent relations with all countries, including Israel, because of this geographic proximity, we have, I wouldn't say suffered, because suffering is with the people that live in those areas, but we have seen some of the spillover effects of these wars and these conflicts, especially the humanitarian disasters taking place in these countries over the years. So any initiative from anyone, be it the superpowers and of course China, would be very welcome from the Cyprus point of view to bring peace and stability in that area. From, of course, the Chinese point of view, the Middle East is a very big market. It's an area of great investment in this area. So I think China's point of view is it needs stability and peace in the area in order to promote its own interests, its own economic interests. So this is why we have seen, especially in recent years, some moves on the part of China to bring together adversaries, like, for example, Saudi Arabia and Iran, or recently we have seen an effort, a mediation effort on the part of China to bring together the Palestinians, all the 14 different factions of the Palestinians, including Hamas, including Fatah, in Beijing, with the signing of the Declaration of Beijing. All these, we consider them as positive because, of course, they don't solve the problems, but they move in the right direction towards to the quest for peace and stability in the area. Regarding the, I would like to say a few words also about relations between China and Turkey. These two countries have developed their relations, and they have upgraded their relations in many fields. although politically they differ on a number of issues, including on Syria, including on Nagorno-Karabakh, including on Cyprus, but they have succeeded in developing their relations to a great extent. Now there is also ongoing cooperation in the energy sector, especially nuclear energy. And of course, there is an interest on the part of Turkey to join, although it's a member of NATO, and for me this is contradictory, but there is an intent of Turkey to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And maybe this will happen in the very near future. Whether we worry about this relationship, I would say no, because we believe that these principles stand of China regarding Cyprus, which, as I said, and I want to repeat it, it's the cornerstone of our relations. One China, one Cyprus policy is really very, very important. So we don't worry that by all these advancement of relations with Turkey will change its policy.
Thank you. Yahia, I wanted to follow up what you alluded to in the COVID context, this extremely positive perception of China in the Maghreb region. Are there also concerns? Is it all rosy, or there's some bit of the economic rise, the takeover of infrastructure? Is this something that also causes concerns?
In the past, there were issues about the quality or things of that nature, but that has changed throughout the region. But to go back to the COVID or the pandemic, which I alluded to earlier, we have to put it in the historical context. China's health diplomacy, which I call it health diplomacy, is not new. It started right after the foundation of the Chinese People's Republic. The first country that received and oversees the first medical mission of China was to Algeria. Right after the French left, the Algerians found themselves, the new state found itself without doctors. And they made a call to the world to provide doctors. So the first mission came in 1963, 1 year after Algeria's independence. Not even 1 year. They traveled by train all the way from China and going through Albania at some point before getting there. And that mission is still operating on a rotating basis. I visited it last year because I'm doing a paper on that, on how the mission operates, etc. But that's not just for Algeria. And you'll see how I link it with the BRI, with the Belt and Road Initiative. So in Mauritania, which is pro-French, with close relations with France, but they didn't have medical facilities. So the first mission also in Mauritania came from China. And they built for them a hospital. Now, when you hear about the Belt and Road Initiative, you think it's all land. I talked about the maritime one, but there is a digital one. Including the Maghreb, they have the digital with Huawei and so on and so forth, satellites, the Arabsat and so on. But there's also the health one. In other words, in the program, if you look at the Chinese documents, in every place that is joining the Belt and Road Initiative, there will be clinics or hospitals being built along the route. So this is just to say that the medical cooperation is not new. So when COVID happened, the Chinese had some institutions in place to assist the countries. And by the way, including a country like Italy, you remember, was very upset with the EU because it didn't get, the assistance it needed. So it was China that provided. So China in that time helped, if you want to look at this medical assistance, helped 150 countries. So this is documented. This is not, rosy propaganda or what have you. It was fact. And so, and as I said earlier, whether you are communist or you're bourgeois, whatever you want to call it, there is cooperation. For instance, Egypt, my colleague here from Egypt can confirm, Egypt with the UAE started the production of the vaccine almost immediately. Now Algeria produces that vaccine. Now Morocco produces that vaccine. And as I said to my colleagues yesterday, good or bad quality or whatever opinion you may have when you're dying, do you care if it's good quality or bad quality? You want something to protect you. So it's not all rosy. There are issues with the diasporas, with the Chinese diasporas. I've talked at the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China. I said, people complain that your population does not, your diaspora, does not interact with people. They go to the compounds of the factory or whatever they're building, and they stay together, they move together. But it's changing, because now you see diasporas in the Maghreb. I can assure you, if you don't believe me, go to those countries in the Maghreb or elsewhere in the Middle East, where you see those open markets and you have Chinese speaking Arabic, the local language, the dialect of Algerian or Moroccan, and they sell, they intermarry with the local population. Even the embassy, I know this for a fact, organizes weddings, between local people and all. So this is relatively new, because the local people usually do not marry with Europeans, but they're getting married to Chinese men, local women with Chinese men, and vice versa. And there, so now, kids from mixed marriages and so on and so forth. So the development is, there's the perception, and I have to emphasize this point. You may say, why? The Chinese never invaded those countries. For the local people, they never colonized us. And secondly, they look like us. They're brown. They're not, blonde, blue-eyed people. And they mix with the society. They mix. I mean, they are there. They see them. And they look, the Chinese and whatnot. So there is this perception that and you have to take into account that one of the most attractive aspects of China to the countries, to the governments, it's the same with Cyprus, there is the non-interference in their domestic affairs. I come, I do business with you, you want to be fascist, you want to be whatever you want to be. That's not my business, it's your country. So I don't interfere in your politics, domestic politics. And that's a fact. So this is something that gives a little bit more attractiveness to China in the region. And then also you have a strategic partnership. Algeria has a comprehensive strategic partnership. Algeria, the close friend. And then the one who is the pro-Western one also has a strategic partnership. Morocco has a strategic partnership with China. So they are, I think China is in a learning curve with the region. They're learning. So they correct their mistakes. They're building, these cultural centers, the Confucius centers and so on, and where they're not allowed, like in Algeria, there was some idiocy where or some members of the government thought that Confucius was some sort of religious figure, which he's not. So the Islamists had opposed the establishment of a Confucius center. So they created classes. And now Chinese is taught in Algeria. So there is this kind of development. They make mistakes, as I said, like the diaspora and so on, but they're correcting them.
I never saw love coming into that panel and overcoming the downsides of the one-child policy with a Maghreb contribution is definitely something I will take home with me. I want to continue a bit on the skeptical note and ask Naser, this One Belt, One Road initiative, the Global Development Initiative, these economic projects that are so beneficial to so many countries have their dark sides, debt trap, the acquisition of critical infrastructure. And some countries seem to be hesitant to join organizations like BRICS or fully benefit, let's say, from the economic offers made by China, one of them being Saudi Arabia. Could you elaborate on this? Is this an accurate assessment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, if you look to the Gulf region, and you have to differentiate between the Gulf and the Africa. You know, these kind of, you might find it in some African countries, or not from the African countries, it's from Western side, critical towards China in a role of Africa. But in
Wrong choice. It was a 50-50 call. Anyway.
But in the Gulf region, despite all of the challenges and the overall relation between China and the Gulf is positive. If you look at the China now and what they're doing economically, they are the biggest trade partner for the Gulf region and Saudi Arabia. They are the biggest contractors in Chinese companies in the Gulf region. Even in investment, green field investment, which is different than FDI, that you build something from zero. China is the top investor in Saudi Arabia and in many countries. And if you look at the government level, public level, all of them, they see China economic role in the Gulf region is positive, welcomed, and everyone encouraging it there. And most of their, especially in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, there is also boards, they integrated with the BRI and Saudi Arabia, many of their projects and Vision 23, they also integrated with the BRI, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And also in a political side, there is a lot of trust between they are operating in, they leave the sensitive issue outside, you know, like human rights, democracy, all of that. They think that concentrating in development between the two sides is very positive for both of them. In BRICS, United Arab Emirates joined, Egypt joined. Saudi Arabia is a different issue because Saudi Arabia is the biggest economy in the Middle East, the most influential country for both sides, China and the United States. So they are leveraging their position to extract more concession from BRICS and from the United States, because they are already negotiating with the United States about defense agreement, and they think they are in a position to put their let's say conditions in both sides, and they will calculate the risk and the benefit for them, and then I think maybe next year or the next 2 years they make the next move for themselves. But overall, to put it in essence, I don't think in economy, I'm not talking about security because it's a different issue. Sorry about that. I think the experience is positive, and if you're looking ahead, I think the Chinese will be, their involvement in economy will increase in Saudi Arabia and many countries, and I think it will be welcome from both sides, the government and the people of the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Last round of questions, and you're doing well with your discipline, so I'm very proud. Yahia, let's start with you. Algeria has very strong relations with Russia, which is rather unique in the region, in the sense that it counterbalances US influence, maybe EU influence. How does China fit in that equation? Could that diversify, in a way, the foreign policy instrumentarium of Algeria?
Let me give you the history of it, of Algeria's relation relations, military cooperation with Russia. It was the West's fault. In 1963, there was the Sand War between Algeria and Morocco. Algeria had just come out of a national liberation war, was not very well armed. It was a guerrilla army and so on. So they asked the US and France to provide weapons, and they refused because Morocco is the anchor of Western powers in the region. So the Algerians went to the Russians, and that's how the relationship started. Today, regarding your question, 70% of Algeria's hardware comes from Russia, and they get the best equipment possible from the Russians. So they see it as an existential relationship, this military cooperation. But China has managed to fit in there with Germany, believe it or not, because the Algerians, diversify their cooperation. So what Algeria is getting, when I was younger, I remember we got Chinese AK-47s, which were Russian, but coming from China. Today, China is able to provide some of the most sophisticated weaponry to the Algerians. So it fits well. It's among the top three: Russia, Germany, China. These are the three, and of course there's Italy for the frigates and some for the Algerian Navy and so on and so forth. So I don't think, though, that relationship in the military realm is going to change. Russia will remain. And I'll add something in another dimension. Algerians look at what's going on in the region. And in the region, the biggest event is President Trump's recognition of Morocco's sovereignty over the illegal territory it occupies, in exchange for the Morocco joining the Abraham Accords. So that creates a big headache and a big national security threat for the Algerians. And so in case of war between Algeria and Morocco supported by Israel, who do you think the West is going to support? And who is going to support the Algerians for their own protection? This is what I have been saying in my articles on both Russia, Algeria, and China, Algeria, is that the Algerians are hedging. Yes, we are non-aligned, but when the hard times come, we can rely only on these two, but not on the U.S. Despite the good relationship, there is a strategic partnership between Algeria and the United States, but in times of crisis, they cannot rely on Western powers.
Naser, we have a time of crisis, just not very far from here. And I want to alternate the question I had in mind for you to update it, basically. If you see what's going on in the confrontation between Israel and the Palestinians, between Israel and Hezbollah, between Israel and potentially Iran, what could be, or what do you think China's role can be in mediation, conflict resolution attempts to constrain what's going on there?
Okay, thank you. If you look at China, they put forward many proposals in the Middle East. They have put a proposal for Libya, Syria, Palestine, the Gulf region. But from the Chinese perspective, they are very involved in two areas, Palestine and the Gulf region. The way they see Palestine as the core issue, and it could spill over, and they said what's happening now in Gaza and Lebanon is to prove their point. If you don't solve that problem politically, it will backfire on you. In Chinese thinking, they think that the United States failed. They've been broken for 40 years, and they landed up with 100% pro-Israeli position. And the position taken by many of European countries and the United States is not going to lead to peace. So from China in that issue, China, they're not putting themselves as a sole broker. They are put the United Nations as a center broker and sort the issue through the Security Council. And if you look at last month, the voting in the United Nations, 2/3 of the countries voted for the Chinese, but not Chinese, but allied with the Chinese position, including Cyprus. I think China is not unique position. They are consistent with the majority of the world. And in my opinion, I think the United States is isolated in this issue. And many in the region, in the Middle East and the Arab world, despite all the shortcomings, and they said China, from the West is rhetoric and they can't do anything. But their position in that area is very appreciated, and they think that's the only way to go forward is to two-state solution and make the positions through the United Nations without China alone or America alone. In the Gulf region, this is another issue. It is the most important economic area for China. If you look at when I say Gulf region, I mean GCC, Iraq, and Iran. And if you look at that region, 80% of the trade between China and Middle East in that region. 50% of China total imports is coming from that region. The biggest market for their economy is that region. So stability in the Gulf region is vital and very important for China. And they look to both the players, which is they think they are most influential in Iran and Saudi Arabia. China came later, started with Oman and Iraq and all of that too. But China, I think it's in a clever way. They thought the situation is right for, they get involved. Saudi Arabia, they want to de-escalate because they want to concentrate in Vision 30 and economy. Situation in Iran, economically very bad, and they don't want to escalate in that area. So I think, and that condition is just continuing. I think it will continue for foreseeable future, despite all the challenges, that spill over from Gaza or Lebanon. But I think both sides, Iran and Saudi Arabia, they want what's happening now to continue between them. And I think the Chinese up to now, and maybe I think in the near future, will be successful to de-escalate between the two sides. If you see the role of China, how I don't see China will play sole role like United States. They can't, mediate but I think China will insist that the resolution of this trouble should be in the United Nations, and that position will continue for many years to come. And I hope they are successful because the region is need that peace and for everyone, for the Palestinian, Israeli, Arabs, Iranian, and everyone. And we see, inshallah.
Thank you. Inshallah for Cyprus. How is? How do you see chances and challenges for Cypriot-Chinese relations in the future, and also for the relations between China and, let's say, the Eastern Mediterranean region?
Okay, as I said before in my first intervention, relations are really good. I should mention that the trade volume between China and Cyprus in 2022 was 1.36 billion. Of course, the biggest chunk is exports of China to Cyprus, and the biggest chunk from that is in shipbuilding. As you know, Cyprus is possesses one of the largest fleets in the world, the third largest in the European Union. So a lot of ship owners, they build their ships in China, which has progressed a lot and it competes now well with Japan. I think that there is a lot of room for improvement of trade relations. Regarding these initiatives of China, especially the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, Cyprus is considered by China, and there is a lot of interest on the part of China, as a very important country, potentially a very important leg of that initiative for many reasons. First, Cyprus is a very important transshipment country. It is the first port, European port, for the vessels leaving the Suez Canal. As I mentioned, also possesses the third largest fleet, maritime fleet in the European Union, 11th in the world. Cyprus is an EU member state. So all these, plus the fact that Cyprus also is a very successful business and services center for Chinese companies that want to operate from Cyprus, and of course it has a very, I would say, attractive taxation system for companies, for Chinese companies, and we have seen in recent years many Chinese companies registering in Cyprus. So from that point of view, Cyprus is considered as a very important country, and this is why we have seen moves on the part of China in recent years to invest. Of course, there is a very big investment in real estate, as you know, because of the real estate, the passport citizenship program that, of course, it ended now. But for a period, China was the biggest investor, the biggest of all investors in Cyprus. So in tourism also there is a lot of room for improvement. Only last week there was the signing of a very important air transport agreement. One of the obstacles is that we don't have direct flights, and this air transport agreement could develop into agreement between air companies to have direct flights, and that of course would tremendously increase the volume of tourism from China. But also in the energy sector, despite the fact that there was a recent disappointment or disaster in one of the contracts that was signed by a Chinese consortium, I think there is still an ongoing interest on the part of China. Cyprus is potentially an important natural gas producer, and I think China would be interested also to invest in the upgrading of ports and helping Cyprus in the development of its natural gas program.
Thank you. Last question, Camille. I think the summary of this panel is that Chinese policies in the region are a success story, by and large. Yeah? And that's a challenge for the European Union, which probably is less successful in its policies in the region. Are there any lessons? And how can the EU deal with this challenge of an increasing influence of China, who seems to do so many things right?
Well, so I don't want to minimize what China is doing in the region, but I want to maybe, like, just for steering a bit the debate, being a bit more of a more skeptical perspective from the Europeans, because I think the main risk for the Europeans is to overestimate a little bit what China is providing to the region. There is a tendency, there's been a big hype in media reports and discussions about China's investments in the region, which was reinforced also by regional countries, because this precisely gives them more leverage in their conversations with the Europeans. This gives them, to their population as well, a narrative to sell about the fact that there are, international powers that matter on the international scene, that can speak with big powers, including China. It fits into that wider narrative of, the changing global order and how they emerge as middle powers, that can have both relations with the US, with the Europeans, but also with Asian powers. And so I think it's important to have like a nuanced picture of what is happening here, because the risk for the Europeans is to self-sabotage a little bit themselves and their own bargaining power. If I can add a few elements here, like on the economic front, since the launch of the BRI, there were a lot of expectations in the region for attracting investment, especially in countries that are struggling to attract investments. And it's great if there were some Chinese projects that help developing infrastructures across the region. I'm not, minimizing that. But if we look at the overall picture, Chinese FDIs in the regions are very disappointing compared to what was expected initially. There is a number of countries, especially, the most unstable ones, Lebanon, Syria, that were expecting China to come in and help reconstruct these countries, where actually there were very little economic footprint from the Chinese. But even for countries that are more successful economically, the Gulf states have, very strong economic relations with China. I'm not denying that. But if we look a bit at the FDIs number, for example, the stock of Chinese FDIs are quite small compared to the size of the Chinese economy. In Saudi Arabia, to give you just an order of size, Chinese FDI stock is about $5 billion. The US FDI stock is double of that, and the EU's FDI stock is 10 times that. So, and we had the same conversation yesterday about Egypt. It's like $1.2 billion of FDI stocks from China. It's $8 billion from the US, and it's 30-something billion dollars from the EU. So there is a risk, and when sometimes we have conversations, same about like ODA flows, etc., there's a tendency to overestimate completely the size of the Chinese financial flows to the region. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And in strategic sectors also, it's interesting to see it's not just about flows, but for example, in advanced technologies, some of the Gulf states, the UAE recently, which is investing a lot in AI, their key AI company, G42, decided recently to cut ties with their Chinese tech providers to do a big mega deal with Microsoft. And so this change is kind of interesting. This was obviously under US pressures, but we see that when they're forced to make a choice between the US and China, they still prefer to deal with US companies because they feel that in these advanced sectors, US companies are more competitive, more innovative, and this is, the right choice for them to make if they want to be on the right side and be key leaders in that sectors. So that for tech. On the security front, the current crisis is quite, again, telling and interesting. I don't want, again, to be completely negative. I think the role of China in supporting that Iran-Saudi deal, even if it's, they didn't play a major role. It's mainly the Saudis coming to them to sign off something they had negotiated before. But anyways, that role is positive because to some extent it may have limited some of the, wider regional conflagrations. So great. But overall, like during the Red Sea crisis, although the Chinese rely a lot on the Red Sea route for their own trade with Europe, they have been quite absent from the security response. So they have negotiated with the Houthis to make sure that their ships would not be targeted. But we can't say that China has been playing a big role there, and the countries around are aware of that. They don't say it, but the Gulf states, and this is the reason why Saudi Arabia is negotiating right now very hard with the US for a big security guarantee package. It's because they know where their security interests lie. And they know that China overall doesn't really care about the Middle East that much. The MENA region is very far for China. It's, it's important for energy, but like the core region for China, the core interests are in the Indo-Pacific. It's the relationship with the US, it's the relationship with Europe. They don't care about the Palestinians, let's be honest. They position themselves. It's more a message to the international community, the pro-Palestinian positioning. it's a way to advance their political positioning, but overall, and I think that regional countries are quite aware about this, and from a more cultural soft power element as well, which I think is almost often not discussed, but still I think very important. When you ask, when you have opinion polls and you ask countries in the region, where do you want to live? We did one in Saudi Arabia recently. Where do you want to live outside of your country? People don't dream to live in China. The majority of them want to live in the US and in Europe. The students go to the US and Europe. So I think in that front, it's important for the Europeans to really have a clear picture. Like, I'm not saying that this shift with China is not important. I think it's extremely important, and you have to take it into consideration now in the way you look at the region. But it's important to have a very nuanced picture, to not self-sabotage your own bargaining power in that kind of new, evolving regional order.
Thank you, Camille. I think you put the success story into perspective, which I think is very helpful at the end of the Q&A part as far as I am concerned. Now comes the Q&A part as far as you are concerned. So we have maybe 10 minutes, maximum 15 minutes. So I will take a maximum of 3 questions. And it's 1, 2, and 3, and then I cut it, unfortunately. Sorry, yeah. Please introduce yourself and address the speakers if you have a specific question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is Mohammed Islami. I am Assistant Professor of International Relations at the University of Minho from Portugal. I'm originally Iranian. I would like to thank you for your inputs. I have some concerns, and my question is directly to Erato. Sorry for misspelling your name. So you mentioned about strategic partnership of Cyprus with China. Is strategic partnership something that Cyprus is seeking to develop with China, or you personally believe that it is already existing? Because when you look at the indicators, the numbers, economic security, military, cultural, technologic, numbers are not there. And when you look at the trade rate, it is still there. And on the other hand, we have your main threat, which is Turkey, as probably one of the 2 only countries in the region that actually have developed a strategic partnership with China. Do you think strategic partnership of China with Turkey is sort of jeopardizing your relationship with China or not? And how do you perceive this strategic partnership with China? Because based on the indicators and based on my personal opinion, it's not there, and you still need so much time as a country in Mediterranean to develop a strategic partnership with China. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Jan. I work for the European Commission here in Cyprus, and I have a question for Mr. Yahia. I thought the example of Algeria was very interesting. I actually just moved from Algeria to Cyprus a while back. I wanted to comment a little bit and have a question regarding the relations of Europe and Algeria and China. I think at the political level, you correctly said that China is basically stepping in and becoming more and more important, and I completely understand. I think Algerians are a little bit fed up with Europeans and are happy to turn to China with, for example, constructions of important infrastructure like the new mosque in Algiers and a lot of other things. But I was wondering about the citizen level. You mentioned more marriages between Chinese and Algerians, and that sort of Algerians would think they're maybe more similar to Chinese than to Europeans. And in that sense, I understand, again, that the past, the French colonization left a certain distaste, let's say. At the same time, we have 5 million Algerians in France, and when I walk the streets of Algiers, people come up to me and talk to me in Derja because they think I'm Algerian, Camille, which is amazing. A lot of people do not know that Algeria is very diverse and a very, very interesting place, I must say. And so, in that sense, also marriages, like culturally, that it left a mark. So I think that Algeria, of of course, it's so big. You have the south, you have the north, but okay, most of the population is in the north. That the cultural link between Europe and Algeria is still
Strong.
very, very strong.
Yes.
Of course, it can diminish over the time. And I think that the Chinese relationship, now the citizens, the Algerian citizens and Chinese citizens, that the gap is still so, so huge. Even if you go, Chinese restaurants, there are really enclaves in Algiers where you will never see a non-Chinese person, and perhaps very, very slowly. But my question would be, do you really think that this can, that Algerians would be sort of become better friends with Chinese than with Europeans? Yeah.
Can you just pass on?
Yes. To whom?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name's Amanda. I'm from the European Policy Centre. It's a think tank in Brussels. I have two questions. The first is related to Chinese disinformation in that region. What is the impact of this, particularly at a societal level? And the second question is about Cyprus-China relations, because you talked about it very enthusiastically, trade, investment, the strategic partnership and whatnot. But how does this correlate with the EU's approach towards China, which is now all about de-risking or decoupling? Isn't there a conflict there?
Okay, I suggest we go in reverse order of the speakers, and if you ideally combine your answers with any final remarks you want to make, so we can wrap up within the time framework we have. Erato, so therefore the floor is yours.
Yes, I think the two are very related, the first one and the last one. And this is regarding, I would say, the challenges, because I didn't mention the challenges in my third intervention, and there are indeed challenges. Because when we talk about strategic partnership, of course, how we view this strategic partnership is primarily in the areas of trade, in the areas of energy, in the areas of culture, in the areas of telecommunication, and not in any military or weapons area. First of all, this partnership is very, very new. I mentioned it was agreed in November of 2021 on the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relations of the two countries. So it's still an infant, and there is a lot to be done. I think we are working, both countries, in that direction. But of course, the big challenge is to balance our membership in the European Union. And of course, this is our primary relationship. And we have to adhere, of course, to all the EU regulations and any other restrictions that will be agreed within the European Union context regarding China. So this is our primary challenge, I would say, balancing our economic interests with China with our adherence to the EU membership and to the EU regulations. And of course, we will do that as we have done in other countries that we have suffered economically. For example, sanctions with Russia, we have followed strictly the sanctions against Russia. But I do hope that we will not come to that point of any severe restrictions regarding trade or now, the other question was about Turkey, and I think I have covered it in my intervention. I don't know if you were here when I covered it. Turkey, yes, it is an important partner of China in many, many, many fields, but so far at least we have not witnessed any change in the position of China. Of course, Turkey is a very big country, strategically located, much bigger in size and population, So there are a lot of economic interest on the part of China to invest, to sell its products. Cyprus is a very small market compared to Turkey. But as it happens with many, many other countries that we have excellent relations, their respective relations with Turkey has not affected the way they see us. And as I said, one of the biggest and most strongest bonds between our two countries is this one China and one Cyprus policy. And I think that this is not going to change. Thank you.
Jan, you'd be surprised that I agree with you. I didn't mean to glorify or intensify or amplify what I was saying, but there are things that are new in the society. If you talk about the Chinese diaspora in Algeria, even when at the peak was 80,000. So there's geography. Algerians are closer to the Spaniards, to the French, to the Maltese, and to others. So, but there is a slight change happening. Of course, Algeria is very diverse. I'm Kabyle, I mean, like you, right? But we do have that. But if you, let's say, when I was your age and was in Algeria, for instance, maybe I was younger than that, but still, it was inconceivable that the Chinese would marry an Algerian. Inconceivable. Now, it's happening. How many are getting married? It's not in the hundreds of thousands, there are a few. But I wanted to mention it to say that there are things that are happening that are different. That's what I was saying. But the attitudes towards the Europeans is changing dramatically, because even the diaspora or the Franco-Algerians are leaving France, for instance, because of the rise of the far right, because of the, you've heard, I mean, Le Monde had a big article on how Algerian doctors, French, but from an Algerian origin, are leaving France, lawyers and so on. Now, these are not the law, the guy in I'm going and going illegally and so on and so forth. I'm talking about people who are really established, who've been there for a long time or who were born there, are living there seeking opportunities in the Gulf. And that's in Le Monde, huh? This is not Yahia Zoubir saying it. So there is a change. And my friend Camille said, nobody wants to live in China. There are people who are going. I put my niece at Fudan University to study. She doesn't want to go back. She loves it. She had the opportunity of being with my brother in Switzerland, but she prefers to be in China. So, yes, it's one individual. It's a few hundred individuals, but look at a few, hundreds of Maghrebis now are in China, and they're integrated in the society. Yeah, they will never get the citizenship and so on, but they're living there, okay? So I don't want to minimize, I mean, even when Camille was talking, I agree with her. The European, EU investments in the Maghreb, and I said it, I think, are much greater than what China is investing. Algeria was the largest recipient in 10 years. I think it got $23 billion. And the trade is $9 billion between, and people think it's big. It's not, but it marks a change. The big change, if you want to know, the big change is at the political level. You have a country, since you live there and you know that, politically, Algerians are very, very concerned or very attached to having an independent policy. I do business with whoever I want. I buy weapons from Russia. The US Congress condemned. The Algerians responded basically, who are you to tell me what to do? It's this mentality that is changing. This is, I want to be independent. I want to keep an autonomous foreign policy. You want to do business with me, I do business. The proof is, I just said, with weaponry, I deal with the Germans, I deal with the Italians. These are Europeans. Algeria has now a close relationship with Italy because it feels that Italy respects its foreign policy. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you, sorry.
Naser. Any final comments? Any final? No, I just tried to catch you off guard. That was the entire point. No, any final comments? No, but if there's anything final you want to say from both of you, then we do the organizers a favor and finish a bit earlier than the time slot allocated to us, even so we're running late for reasons we're not responsible for. So my thanks go to my 4 fantastic panelists and their great input and their discipline in keeping time and being to the point. I really enjoyed chairing you, and that's an honest statement. Thank you for listening. I hope you got out of it what you wanted to get out of it. I'm pretty optimistic that we delivered on what we promised. So enjoy the lunch break. Thank you for coming. Thank you.